I would like to introduce our speaker. Lynnette Khalfani-Cox, the Money Coach, is a personal finance expert, speaker, and author of 15 money management books, including her New York Times bestseller, Zero Debt, The Ultimate Guide to Financial Freedom. Lynnette has been seen on more than 1,000 TV segments nationwide, including television appearances on Oprah, Dr. Phil, The Dr. Oz Show, The Steve Harvey Show, Good Morning America, The Today Show, and many more. A former financial news journalist, Lynnette now co-owns the Money Coach Net LLC, a financial education company that she runs with her husband, Earl Cox. As a subject matter expert on many personal finance topics, including credit and debt, saving and budgeting, paying for college, mortgages, and home ownership, as well as entrepreneurship and wealth building, Lynnette helps organizations of all kinds to develop and roll out high-quality financial literacy programs and campaigns. She also offers online financial education resources, curriculums, content, and provides strategic counsel to companies, nonprofits, government agencies, and educational institutions that really want to launch financial products and services to help their business. So before starting the moneycoach.net in 2003, Lynnette was a Wall Street Journal reporter for CNBC, where she covered business and personal finance news. Lynnette spent nearly 10 years at the Dow & Jones & Company, working as a reporter, bureau chief, deputy managing editor, and personal finance editor. Lynnette, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this presentation. I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you, Brittany. Very much appreciate that introduction. And let me welcome you all again to this presentation. And let me tell you something as a quick confession, so to speak, because it's a part of my bio that Brittany didn't mention, talking about the accolades and the 15 books and having a New York Times bestseller and the TV. All that is good. But you know what? One of the things I want you all to know is that I was actually deep in debt myself at one point in time. So back in 2001, I had $100,000 in credit card debt alone. So this topic I know a lot about. It's certainly something that's near and dear to my heart personally and professionally. And don't judge me for having had that $100,000 in credit card debt. I paid it all off in 3 years. I never missed a single payment about it. And yes, then I wound up writing that book, that New York Times bestseller about it. So let's kind of launch right in, because I promised you guys that for this session, we would talk about 5 options to dealing with debt. So many times people think about, oh, how can I get rid of my debt? What can I do to manage my debt? Or how can I eliminate debt? Well, you really need to understand fully what your alternatives are. And at the core, no matter what strategy you opt for, there really are just 5. So in this workshop, I'm going to walk you through what those 5 debt relief options are so that you can evaluate your options and understand the pros and cons or the consequences of how you might deal with your debt. I want you to really have a full appreciation for what the credit ramifications might be for dealing with debt in one given manner versus another, what the financial and tax implications in some instances might be. Again, I'm not a accountant, I'm not a tax specialist or a lawyer, anything like that. Obviously, the information and tips that I'll be sharing with you are based on my own experience and my professional expertise the last 17 years owning my financial education company, and as Brittany said, before that, even working as a financial journalist. So you'll have to evaluate which option or which approach is best for you, but I do want you to understand that there can even be legal consequences involved in terms of the manner in which you choose to get rid of or handle your debt. So we're going to cover all of those things. That's my objective in general for this session today. So, okay, what are the 5 options? Here we go. In essence, if you're going to deal with your debt, you can do one of these 5 things. You can just kind of you can try to borrow your way out of debt. You can negotiate, either yourself or a third party can negotiate on your behalf, but you can try to negotiate away your debt. You can simply walk away from your debt and not deal with it, or you can pay your way out of debt. Ignore it, borrow to get rid of it, negotiate, walk away, or pay your way out of debt. Those are the 5 options that we're going to be talking about throughout this section. So what happens if you choose to ignore your debt, stick your head in the sand more or less? Well, that certainly has its kind of pros for some people. You can just pretty much keep doing what you have been doing. You don't have to change anything on your part. You can, kind of make like the person who says, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. You can just kind of let things ride. Well, unfortunately, that has its downsides, and the drawbacks mainly are that, in this case, ignorance is not bliss. And you can, in fact, make your financial circumstances a lot worse. You can add to your aggravation and anxiety, the stress and the worries that you might have about your finances if you just kind of wallow in it and choose to kind of ignore your debt. So who should try to, think about this, or, I don't know, what might the best case scenario be if you did, in fact, just ignore your debt? Well, I guess in theory, you could be one of those people who kind of lives off the grid. You might say, I don't need any credit. I don't really care about the financial implications or the credit ramifications, say, of not paying my debt if I get dinged on my credit, etc. You might just say, you know what, I'm just going to blow off my creditors. Well, worst case scenario, that approach could actually land you in big trouble, particularly legal trouble. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer, and I definitely know that we don't have debtors' prisons in this country anymore, thankfully. However, it's definitely the case that some creditors will put your account into collections. They can get judgments against you, and unfortunately, a high number of people who have financial judgments against them, court-ordered judgments, they fail to appear in court, and then they wind up getting an arrest warrant over the court matter or the failure to appear. So you just don't want to go down that path, in my opinion, and have that worst-case scenario. So for whom is this, an option, thinking about ignoring their debt? Well, it's if you've kind of given up. If you said, look, I'm just going to opt out of the financial system as a whole, and I'm just not going to deal with that. I don't think that's the best approach, and I'm going to hope that you want to think about other alternatives. So let's move on and talk about borrowing your way out of debt as a potential strategy. Now, some people say that really you can't just borrow your way out of debt. And I understand the reasons why they suggest that. And I'm going to walk you through what it means to borrow your way or attempts to do so. But in my opinion, it is actually achievable. You can do it. It's just that it doesn't always work in practice because most people go about it the wrong way. And I'm going to tell you what the mistakes that they make are in terms of trying to borrow their way out of debt. So if you considered borrowing as an alternative, as a way to better manage your debt, especially that credit card debt that you might be carrying, you really have several different ways that you can borrow to do so. One, you could refinance your house. You could tap into some of the equity that's in your house and use that home equity to pay off your credit card debt. You might think about doing a credit card balance transfer, where you get like a 0% interest rate. You use it to pay off your higher rate credit card debt, and you try to pay off your debt more quickly. Or maybe you'll consider getting something called a peer-to-peer loan. It's also known in the industry as a P2P loan. It's a way people are increasingly using to, in fact, pay off high-rate credit card debt. Maybe debt consolidation might be an option you consider, or just going to a family member. Okay, so here's the core of So I got to walk you through the pros and cons, the drawbacks, and the disadvantages as well. So let's look at each one of these so you have a really clear idea about what could potentially happen. If you have a home equity loan, for example, or if you take a home equity line of credit, or if you do a refinance and take cash out, well, one of the positives of that is that presumably that debt would be at lower rates than your credit card interest rates would carry. You then have better cash flow, just one monthly payment to deal with as opposed to multiple payments for, say, multiple credit cards. And it potentially could have a longer-term positive impact on your credit score. And that's because the conversion that would essentially happen. When you have revolving credit or credit card debt, that is judged more harshly in a credit scoring system, and mortgage debt is treated more favorably in the credit card in the credit scoring system. So that tends to boost your credit score. Of course, though, as I really want you to understand throughout this presentation, every strategy has its own relative pros and cons. There is no magic bullet, no one size fits all solution, nor one solution that is just perfectly fine and acceptable for everyone and without consequence. And in this case, if you're refinancing your house, there are several considerable drawbacks. One is that you're putting your house, which is likely your single biggest asset, at risk. You will also now have a larger mortgage payment to make, and you swapped out, as I mentioned, unsecured debt, the credit card debt, for now a secured or collateralized form of debt, that home. And if you don't pay, of course, you could get foreclosed upon in terms of your house. Not only that, but you also run the risk. Some people have not quite gotten their spending under control. Not to mention we have a ton of uncertainty economically right now. So you run the risk of running those credit cards up again after you've paid off the balances. But let's say it all works out and you don't run up the credit card balances again. You use home equity or refi and you cash out and you're able to pay off your credit card debt. Then hey, best case scenario, everything has worked out great. In a worst case scenario, though, things don't go according to plan. Life hits you fast and hard with something unexpected, and yes, even though you might have had the best of intentions, everything kind of goes wrong. Well, the same could be true if you did another form of borrowing in terms of using a balance transfer. Definitely has its own pros and cons. The big thing is, of course, that if you're going to do a balance transfer, you're definitely going to get a lower interest rate, a so-called teaser rate. Typically, they are 0% offers. They might last 6, 12, 18 months. That, of course, improves your cash flow over that time, and you have generally lower payments. The drawback, though, is that those teaser rates do expire, of course, right? They don't last forever. And the fact is, you have to pay a fee, typically, to do the balance transfer. Sometimes they're 1, 2, or 3% of the amount that you're actually transferring. For some people, they can also be tempted. They, might do a balance transfer, and now one card has a zero balance on it, and now the spending may or may not be under control, so there's the temptation to keep charging again. That balance transfer can also, at least temporarily, hurt your credit rating, and that's because anytime you seek or request credit, it's going to be an inquiry that is generated on your credit report. And again, that inquiry temporarily hurts your credit score. But again, maybe best case scenario, you're very disciplined, you do the balance transfer, everything works out perfectly. Worst case scenario, though, is that that extra credit card that you did the balance transfer was kind of a trap for you, and maybe it didn't work out so well, so your debt payoff plan goes bust. So you might think, is there another borrowing strategy that can help me to get out of debt? Well, there are peer-to-peer or so-called P2P loans. Now, these have interest rates, again, that are typically lower than your standard 12, 14, 16% credit card. The time frame for which you have a P2P loan is also much shorter. Typically, they're 1 to 3 years, these loans. It can actually have a positive impact on your credit score because a peer-to-peer loan is classified as an installment loan as opposed to revolving credit or revolving debt, which is the case with credit cards. And then, again, it helps you to get out of debt faster because we know that with credit card balances, typically companies only ask you to pay about 2% of the outstanding balance each month, and that's why a lot of people tend to kind of languish and have debt around month after month, year after year. With a P2P loan, they're putting you on a tighter, stricter schedule, 1 to 3 years. Well, on the drawback side, in terms of disadvantages, not everybody can qualify, not everybody can get a P2P loan. The companies that offer them typically require you to have good credit. So they have, in general, high rejection rates. Not everybody gets approved. Your monthly payments can actually be higher because, as I mentioned, the time frame is shorter for you to pay off that debt. And then, just like with opening a new credit card account, you'd be having an inquiry on your credit report, so you would have potentially that short-term negative impact on your credit score. But again, for the folks who are disciplined, who say, hey, I had never even heard about P2P or peer-to-peer loans, I think I do want to seek out one of these loans. I want a really tight time frame to pay off my debt and be done with them. Hey, best case scenario for you, if you stick to the payment plan, everything can work out. Worst case scenario, though, is that if something happens over the next 1, 2, potentially 3 years or so, and you don't pay as agreed, then it's kind of like, you know, you've shot yourself in the foot, and your credit and finances might be in even a more precarious position. What about debt consolidation in terms of a borrowing strategy? Remember, that's the one we're talking about now, strategy number 2, in terms of your 5 options for dealing with debt. Well, debt consolidation gives you a way to kind of streamline your obligations, and you take multiple debts, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you might have, and you consolidate them into one monthly payment. And a lot of people like that because it's much more easy and convenient to track everything. You can have better cash flow, and some people just like the idea of knowing that there's just one obligation to pay as opposed to many obligations. Well, unfortunately, a lot of debt consolidation, loan offerings, and products are kind of confusing. You'll hear about these, you know, on TV ads and on the radio and whatnot, but they're not always clear about what's being offered. And oftentimes, once you kind of drill down and get into the nitty-gritty of it, they're really sort of asset-based loans that someone is willing to extend to you if you put up some kind of collateral, your house, your car, etc. And so that is not always, of course, appealing to different people. And then, of course, any kind of credit check could also pose that short-term hit to your credit score. But again, under some circumstances, again, the ideal scenario is that everything goes according to plan and you're successful in your debt elimination strategy. On the other hand, nothing might go according to plan. You might do a debt consolidation loan, find out that, oh, maybe you put your house up and you can't afford that larger payment, the credit card bills are rising, and it is not at all what you anticipated. Some people, because of all of those other things that they might have to encounter with traditional loans or even alternative sources of funding, might say, let me just go to a family member or a friend, someone close to me, and try to get a loan to pay off my debt, and then I'll pay that person back. Well, certainly there are some benefits and some potential upside to that. They're probably not going to charge you interest, or it might be really low interest. You won't have to run get a credit check run on you. And a family member is more likely to be pretty flexible with you in terms of payment or repayment terms. The drawbacks, though, they're pretty awkward, right? To have to ask someone, and you might feel like you're kind of, going hand in hand, so to speak, to request a family member to provide you some cash. And at the end of the day, you have to think about, like, is this going to change the nature of the relationship? Is there going to be kind of a power imbalance or some other kooky dynamic? Is are we going to feel awkward later if we're, sitting around the table at Thanksgiving? Hopefully we can do that, COVID notwithstanding. So there's definitely some drawbacks in terms of going to a family member for a potential loan. But you know what? Maybe it actually works. Maybe not only does it work, but maybe you solidify your relationship with that other person. Personally, I've had to go both ways. I've had loans that I've extended to family members, and they have, in fact, paid me back, and there was no issue whatsoever. But I can tell you, I've also had instances where somebody did not pay me back. And it didn't damage the relationship in terms of disrepair being, kind of insurmountable, but it was uncomfortable. And so you have to kind of think about whether or not that's something that you'd be willing to risk at all in terms of the potential to jeopardize a relationship if things go awry. So overall, if you're going to consider this strategy number 2 as your option for dealing with debt, I want you to think about for whom this approach might be best. And in my opinion, it's really best for those who've been hit by what I call the dreaded D's, things like a downsizing, loss of income, a divorce, a death in the family, disability, disease, or any kind of a disaster of some kind that has affected your finances. I think we can all agree that COVID has certainly proven to be a disaster that has affected so many people's finances. We know, of course, that we've had, over 40 million people to hit unemployment rolls because of COVID. We know, of course, that some of you who are probably, since you are NAR members, you're probably also either homeowners or potentially property owners. Maybe you have investment properties, and maybe you might have some debts right now because your tenants haven't paid. Again, personal experience, my husband and I live in the greater Houston area, in the northwest suburbs of Houston. We own our house here, and we own 6 other properties, 6 rentals, and are closing, as a matter of fact, on this month on the 7th one. Well, out of our existing properties, all of our tenants have paid on time except one. So one gentleman worked in the restaurant business, and he was furloughed, and then he was laid off. And so for about a month, he was not able to pay his rent. So we have a mortgage on the property, and we still have to go on and pay the mortgage. So, but I understand, of course, that, again, given the severity of this crisis, some of us may have debts, some of us may be financially strapped and challenged, of course, because of the COVID-19 emergency. And it may not have anything to do with what you personally have done or have not done, but it may be about somebody else whose perhaps failure to pay you has impacted you. But in general, if you're going to borrow, I suggest you only do it if whatever the problem is has been fixed, because then the underlying issue has been solved, and then you're not likely to be sort of caught back up in that same debt trap as you might be if the problem has not yet been resolved. All right, so let's move on and talk about number 3 in terms of your options, and that pertains to negotiating your way out of debt. So when it comes to negotiating, some people are frankly more comfortable at it than others. Some people actually like it better than others. I happen to be a person who likes to negotiate. I even have a course on Money Coach University called Negotiating for Women. And so I just think it's a good skill for everyone to learn. But when it comes to your debt, at the end of the day, you have to make a choice about the level of engagement that you want to choose at this point. Do you personally want to try to negotiate away your debt, or do you want somebody else to do it for you, a third party? Well, if you do it yourself, there's definitely some upside to that. First of all, it's empowering. I mean, you feel like, oh, yes, I did that. I was able to successfully get an outcome that's more financially advantageous to me. It's also free. You're not going to have to pay yourself to negotiate on your own behalf, right? So you can learn a lot. You can learn about yourself. You can learn a lot about your obligations. You can learn how creditors might handle different situations. And then, of course, it can be a financial relief to know that you followed through on a game plan. And, I'm kind of guessing that some of you, because, again, you're already in the people business, as realtors, you already have good communication skills. You probably already have good negotiating skills. And so you probably are quite well positioned and well suited to try at least to negotiate on your own. But the fact is, it does require some effort. And not everybody has the organizational skills, the time, the capacity to do the ongoing part of the negotiations that are typically necessary to get yourself out of debt. Because it does require getting on the phone and talking to your creditors. It does require writing letters. It does require documentation and keeping up with who you talked to at what point in time, what the resolution was, what the agreement was, and then some follow-up on that. And so, you know what? Some people might say, that's just too time consuming. I don't have time for all that. I'm trying to run my business. I'm tending to my family, etc. And it might not get you the outcome that you desire at the very end. But you know what? Maybe you do negotiate. And again, I'm thinking that a lot of you are probably very good communicators and probably excellent negotiators. So maybe you actually have a really viable option here, and you actually get your finances back on track and lower your bills by negotiating on your own behalf. Well, what's the worst that could happen? I guess the worst that could happen is that, you know what, you don't get very good movement at all from your creditors. And mostly it costs you sort of sweat equity. It costs you time because you spend this time, you write the letters, you talk on the phone, and then your economic situation really hasn't changed. So that's kind of a worst case scenario. Who should try negotiating? First and foremost, anybody who has not yet given it a shot. Anybody who has the time and the willingness and the ability, again, whether that's in terms of mental capacity and energy to put toward the effort, or the time of flexibility. And again, even though you're in the real estate business, a lot more of us obviously are doing everything virtually. I know a lot of you have virtual showings and virtual open houses and remote closings and things of that nature. So you have more time at home, so you might have a little more flexibility, and you might be able to negotiate for yourself. Well, what about those of you who might say, nope, don't have time for that. Let me let somebody else handle it. Well, I want to walk you through what happens if a third party negotiates on your behalf, because there are really two different approaches that are completely different when it comes to negotiating away your debt. And those two approaches are reflected in what debt settlement firms do versus what debt management companies do. And let me explain to you how each operates, and again, what some of the ramifications are if you choose either one of these strategies. So if a third party does it for you, generally speaking, you can have some really good upside. You might get some late payments and penalties and other charges removed. They might get your interest rates lowered drastically. Sometimes it can even be done free or at a very low cost. I'll walk you through when that occurs. And I think the main advantage is that these guys are professionals, whether it's debt management companies or debt settlement firms. This is what they do all day long. And so, of course, they have a lot more experience than you or I do. And that can kind of relieve you of the burden of having to perform that task. The drawbacks, though, are that some of these services can be pretty high in terms of the cost. Even if it's just kind of a medium charge, it's not certainly a free service. In some cases there are, and I'll show you in a minute in which instances you might expect to have free services where somebody could negotiate on your behalf. But they can have impact on your credit, and potentially they can have tax ramifications. You also might have to forego using that plastic in your wallet. And for some people, it's like, oh, I have to give up my credit card, really? And the answer is yes, really. Some of them do require it. So let's take a look at which ones require which of these features. We'll start with debt settlement. So debt settlement is the more costly approach than is debt management. Remember, guys, we're talking about two different processes, debt settlement versus debt management. Either one can be good for the right person, but I just want you to understand what each one entails. Typically, with debt settlement, you're going to be asked to refrain from paying your creditors. So they're going to tell you, listen, instead of paying, $100 a month here, $150 a month there, $75 a month to this creditor, don't pay anything. Don't pay for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months or so. Instead of making those payments to your creditor, the debt settlement company is going to tell you to send the money to them. They're going to put it in a reserve or an escrow account. I'm sure this is kind of familiar with you. Again, you guys know in the real estate business, when a transaction happens, a third party might take the due diligence payment or something, the escrow money, and put it in a reserve account. Well, these debt settlement companies put that money in reserve, and then after a given number of months, 3 months, 6 months or so, Then they approach your creditors and they try to settle your debt for essentially pennies on the dollar. So let's say you had, $10,000 worth of debt that you owed and you did not pay for 3 months or maybe 6 months, and then you sent money, say, $2,000 instead to a debt settlement company. Then 3 or 6 months of you doing that, they would take your $2,000 and they would go and talk to your, say, 2 or 3 creditors, and they would say, listen, my client can't pay, but they do have this $2,000. Would you be willing to settle this balance in full? You know what? You haven't gotten any money in the last 3 months or the last 6 months. Some money is better than no money. Here, we're willing to write your check and give you the money right now if you will settle this debt for, say, 20 cents on the dollar, or a total of $2,000 versus the $10,000 owed. So that's, in effect, how debt settlement works as a process. Well, let's say this works. In the best case scenario, let me show you exactly what would happen. Then, yes, let's say your creditors go, you know what, we've written off this account already, we might as well get some money. Some money is better than none. And so they take the deal. And yes, you only pay a fraction of what you actually owe. In this instance, maybe $2,000 versus the, $10,000 that you actually owed. So you get rid of the debt legally. That sounds great, right? And it is great because now that $8,000 obligation, you don't have to pay that anymore. Well, even in the best of circumstances, you need to understand that there's still credit and tax implications of doing debt settlement. And the reason is that the $8,000 in the example that I gave you in terms of the amount that was, quote unquote, forgiven by the creditor, that $8,000 is going to be taxed. The creditor is going to send you a 1099, and then they're also going to send that same 1099 to the IRS. And so you're going to get a tax bill the following year. And the IRS does tax that form of forgiven debt. So you have to take that into account when you're considering doing a debt settlement. Now, for some people, they might say, I don't care. I'll deal with IRS and Uncle Sam later. If I can get rid of paying this $8,000 worth, you know what? My marginal tax rate is 22%. I'm still ahead. So some people might say, that's fine with me. But again, I just want you to be aware of that as a tax consequence. Again, I'm not accountant, but I'm just telling you the process here. The other potential, and not even potential, the other definite scenario that will happen is that your credit will be damaged. Now, why would it be damaged? And it's essentially because, remember the process, you're being asked to refrain from making payments. So what do you think is going to happen if you don't pay your credit card bills for 1, 2, 3, or maybe even 6 months? During that time, your creditors are going to be reporting you to the bureaus, to Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Again, for some people, as you're weighing your options, some people may say, I don't care, I'm already behind on my credit obligations, I've already missed a payment or two, the damage has been done, if I can just get rid of this debt, that'll be better for me, okay? So that's the best case scenario with debt settlement. Worst case scenario, though, is that you actually hire a debt settlement company that is pretty ineffective, that cannot get the creditors to budge at all. And then now you've gone through this process, you've perhaps paid some money, potentially a lot of money. They did the work, but they got poor or no results. Well, now the bills are still due, your credit has been damaged, and debt collectors are still chasing you. So that's not a good situation. All right, so let's talk about debt management. Again, a separate process, completely different thing than debt settlement. Here's how this works. First, you typically get enrolled in what's called a credit counseling program, because with a debt management plan, also known as a debt management program or a DMP, they are going to be looking to kind of help you to address some of the underlying issues. If they say, listen, you haven't been budgeting, you don't have proper cash management or money management controls in place, they want to kind of help you to learn how to do better from a financial education standpoint and from the standpoint of deal with your creditors. And as it turns out, they've actually pre-negotiated rates with creditors. And so debt management companies have both some for-profit institutions, but a lot of them are actually nonprofits. So you can find a debt management company, for example, that is a HUD certified credit counseling agency. It's a HUD certified credit counseling and housing agency. They help people who have housing, credit, and budget problems. So typically what they'll see is that if you can't pay your bills, they will enroll you in a debt management program, and those debt management programs require you to cut off the credit card. Now, in some cases, they might let you keep one credit card, but typically they'll say as a criteria or as a, one of the guidelines for you enrolling in the debt management program, you're required to close down the credit cards. Really, the creditors themselves have required that. And the reason is that the creditors might say, listen, we're going to waive fees. We're going to agree to, take out those late payments and penalty charges. We're going to let this person have a very low interest rate as well, perhaps 0% or maybe a single-digit interest rate in the 1 to 9%, certainly something much, much less than you had been paying. So as a result of that kind of a, quote-unquote generosity from the creditors, yes, you're typically required to close out those credit card accounts. So in a best-case scenario with a debt management plan, maybe you do, in fact, get your bills all lowered. You're able to maintain your credit rating because you are continuously paying the bills. You kind of get things back on track, and within several years, and this is common with a debt management program, again, it varies based on the amount of debt that you have and the amount of your obligations and what you're able to afford to pay every single month. But really, it ranges from about 3 years on average to 5 years in terms of the repayment plan. That's very common. So that's the best case scenario for debt management. Well, worst case scenario is that, you kind of only have a slight drop in your monthly payment. Maybe you don't really feel from a cash flow or a cash management standpoint, you don't feel the easing of the financial burden of paying all those credit card bills and whatnot. And so, you might be able to or not be able to repay as agreed if you have a hiccup or two along the way. And again, we're talking about typically about a 3+ year time frame. If you don't pay, then you're risking further damage to your credit because, again, you can still be reported to the bureaus. So, overall, when you're coming to think about negotiating as a strategy for getting rid of your debts and dealing with your debts, who is this best for? Well, I think it's best for somebody who has tried to negotiate on their own, but wasn't able to successfully do so. Maybe that's when you think about having a third party. Maybe you're feeling like, I'm just in over my head. I'm drowning in debt. I just can't manage all this. I need some outside help. I need a third party to come in and help me, either a debt management or a debt settlement company. Somebody who wants a very structured payment plan as well could benefit from having a third party to negotiate on their behalf. Okay, so what about the last two strategies? Well, number 4, in terms of your options for dealing with debt, really boils down to you kind of, saying, I wash my hands of this debt and I'm walking away from it. I can't pay it anymore. In essence, you're saying, I'm going to head to bankruptcy court. And in terms of bankruptcy in America, for consumers, you have 2 different options. Chapter 7, which is a form of bankruptcy where you attempt to wipe out most of your consumer debts, or Chapter 13, which is a so-called wage earners plan, where you actually repay. You're going to reorganize your debts. You're going to repay some or all of your obligations. So with Chapter 7, here's how it works. You have to pass an income and a means test. And then if you do, you're able to be enrolled in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and to have a lot of your consumer debts and your consumer obligations wiped away. For some people, though, the hard part might be qualifying, especially under the means portion. They're going to look at all of your expenses. They're going to look at your income, whatever level it might be. They're going to say, do you have at least $100 or more that you could put toward your debt? And if so, they'll probably try to steer you into a Chapter 13. Well, the advantages of being in a Chapter 7 is that This is the one where you kind of get that fresh start. You get to kind of wipe the slate clean and get rid of many of your consumer obligations, and in particular, those credit card bills. You might also get, or you can get, a stay for legal actions. And a stay just means kind of a putting at bay of your creditors if they come after you from a legal standpoint. If you're under wage garnishment or official collection, foreclosure, seizure of your car, or repossession, things of that nature, you can get those things stayed or put at bay. The disadvantages, though, of Chapter 17 is that you can't wipe out all your debts in bankruptcy court. For example, if you have student loans and 45 million Americans do owe federal and or private student loans, that generally cannot be discharged in bankruptcy court. Child support is another obligation that you can't get rid of in bankruptcy court. And that bankruptcy is going to stay on your credit report for 10 years. For some people, they also feel like, I had a failing here, quote unquote, or they see it as a stigma as having not lived up to a certain obligation, or they feel like it's going to hurt their ability to do something, like maybe you want to get another home loan in the future. And if so, you might need to wait 2 years or so to do that. Let's talk now about Chapter 13 as the walking away option, because it differs, as I mentioned, from Chapter 7. With Chapter 13, it's a so-called wage earners plan. You have to be working. You have to have income in order to be in this plan. Again, you're going to reorganize and repay either all or some of your debts to your creditors over a 3 to 5 year time span. And for a lot of people, this is kind of the relief that they need. They're like, oh, the debts are out of control. If I could just get some, either a stay, if I could put my creditors at bay, if I could not have wages garnished or my house foreclosed upon, etc. So they like the idea of getting some breathing room and some time to get things all reorganized. One of the drawbacks, though, of being in a Chapter 13 is similar to a Chapter 7, is that bankruptcy is going to stay on your credit report for 10 years. In this instance, you might have to wait a year or so just to get a home loan. And again, some people still feel like they have this stigma if they've gone through a bankruptcy of any kind, even if they reorganized and repaid their debts. Under a best case scenario, though, you get this process in motion and you're able to wipe out your debts or to reorganize and to repay them as agreed. And then you do get a fresh start, whether that's through a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13. Personally, it's my opinion that no one should feel a stigma of filing for bankruptcy protection. I do think that it should be a last resort. However, I also believe that it's a social safety net, and it's there for a reason. You're not doing anything wrong. You shouldn't feel bad about it if you, in fact, do need to file for bankruptcy protection. So in a worst case scenario, though, if you don't pay as agreed, then yes, as I explained to you with any other obligation, then your credit is going to be further damaged. Or in an extreme scenario, those who kind of haven't fixed the problems or the issues they might encounter, sometimes they wind up in bankruptcy court again down the road. So who should consider bankruptcy? Again, outside of the fact that I said I think you should be using this as a last resort, if you're in any of these situations, I do think you should consider it. Anybody with huge medical bills, we know that healthcare costs have skyrocketed in America, and it's one of the main reasons that a lot of Americans have been thrown into debt and indeed consider bankruptcy. If you look at your bills and you say, I've just run the numbers here, and there's absolutely no way, even if I took 5 to 7 years, I still wouldn't be able to repay these creditors, then I think you should give bankruptcy a look. It's a viable option. Again, if you're being seized upon or attacked by creditors from a legal standpoint, you might consider bankruptcy. Or if you've had a lengthy period of unemployment, and again, we know that COVID has affected nearly all of us in terms of either reduced hours, reduced pay, layoffs, furloughs, a whole bunch of issues that folks all across the country have been encountering. And then under those circumstances, yes, bankruptcy is a viable option. But here's the last strategy, and it's about paying your way out of debt. Because, of course, many of you are going to think like, okay, let me see what I can do, or should I consider, out of all of the 5 options, simply paying it off and dealing with my debt in that way. Well, of course, the upside to that is that you're going to keep your credit rating intact, and you're going to get that personal satisfaction of saying, "Whew, I did it." You know, it was a hard, long slog. It was a chore, but I did it. Certainly in my case, when I paid off my $100,000 in credit card debt that I had, this is the option that I chose. I knew my options. I knew I could have done bankruptcy or debt settlement, etc. But given my circumstances at the time, I chose to try to, chip away at it, and it was something that I was able to accomplish. The drawback, though, is that I'm not going to tell you this is easy, because honestly, it's not. I mean, it's a process, and in some cases, it might take you a bit longer than you anticipate. Again, for me, it took 3 years for me to pay off $100,000 in credit card debt. I was earning a 6-figure salary at the time. I did ultimately go through a layoff, even in the midst of paying off my debt. So I experienced kind of both sides of it. And you need to understand that if you're going to be committed to paying off your debt, you're going to have to be in for the long haul. So in a best case scenario, though, you will feel so good about it. Trust me on that. You'll say, yes, I did it. I'm kind of on the path to building wealth and to making myself and my family much more secure in the future. And of course, that wealth building starts with eliminating the debt, right? Because as you probably know, when you start looking at your net worth, for example, and assessing your wealth, you're really going to look at 2 things. You're going to look at your assets, what you own, then you're going to subtract your liabilities, what you owe, and then the result is your net worth. And so to the extent that you can get rid of some of those liabilities, anytime you chip away at the liabilities, that boosts your net worth. In a worst case scenario, though, while you're trying to pay off debt, though, if you don't stick to the plan, or if you haven't mentally kind of committed to the process and you don't know the best strategies to use, then you can kind of stay mired in debt month after month, year after year. And you might even start to kind of mentally throw in the towel. You might think, well, everybody has debt, or you know what, I have $10,000 in debt, $20,000 in credit card debt, $40,000. I don't know how much debt you have, but you might kind of get shackled to it, even mentally, because you might just kind of start accepting it that, oh, this is going to be around forever. I'm going to have this until I retire or until I die. Well, I don't want you to think that way about it, but that is a worst case scenario. So for those of you who are considering paying off the debt, of course, there's some people who are, better suited, in a better position to do so. Obviously, it's somebody who is employed, who has a, fairly stable income. It's also the folks who are capable of making adjustments and changes, being flexible. And of course, COVID has called upon us all to pivot in so many ways and to be flexible and to make changes. And the same is going to be true if you commit to paying off your debt. You're going to have to tweak some things in your life. So at the end, what are the options as we recap here? Yes, you can ignore your debt. You can try to borrow your way out of debt. You can negotiate your way out of debt, either yourself or with a third party. You can walk away from your debt via bankruptcy, whether that's Chapter 7 or 13, or you can pay your way out of debt. I actually have an entire course. Of course, you heard us mention Zero Debt, The Ultimate Guide to Financial Freedom, and I shared in that book what I did to get out of debt. But I also have courses on Money Coach University that are focused just on the folks who want to learn how to pay to get their way out of debt, because I really believe it's within most of our powers to do that. But honestly, at the end of the day, I don't know your personal circumstances, let's be honest. I don't know the specific challenges that each one of you are facing, and you have to consider where you are in this moment. You have to deal with what your family circumstances are. Do you have a spouse or a partner or a significant other that's working, or has that person's income been affected? What are your goals for the future, for example? Like, are you thinking, hey, I need to pay for my kids' college education or pay off my own student loans? I want to buy some property. Oh, or you know what? I'm an entrepreneur here running my own business as a realtor. I need to create financial security for myself because retirement is super important. My husband and I, again, we're entrepreneurs. We own our financial education company, and we have since 2003. So 17 years and going strong there. Let me knock on wood here. But we have to create our own retirement security. So we have something called a solo 401k, just like you have people who are W-2 employees and work for an organization. They might have a 401k or a 403b, a 457, that kind of thing. If they're in a nonprofit, they might have the 403b. But you have to think about retirement as well as you're considering your debt payoff plan. Ultimately, you're also going to have to think about your own risk tolerance and what's comfortable for you. Again, because you are realtors, I'm assuming that you guys are already into real estate, and some of you may have investments or would like to invest further in real estate. Well, again, to the extent that you can reduce your debt, that might allow you the ability to acquire more rental properties, more investment properties, and use that as income that can help you to navigate uncertain times, whether it's in the current or present tense, or even in the future when you're looking at things for retirement, having an income stream for retirement. You also have to think about your own financial capacity. How much financial education and literacy and skills do you currently possess? How much are you willing to learn, and so forth? Speaking of learning, I want to point you to a great resource, because anybody who feels like he or she has not quite got the whole cash management and budgeting thing down just yet, because you're a member of NAR, you already have, as a realtor, as your membership with the National Association of Realtors, this free resource. It's a personal budgeting tool that can help you to really get a handle on your income and your expenses. So you can either email for it, you can get online and get it at financialwellness.realtor. You can email financialwellness@nar.realtor as well to get a copy of this. But again, guys, this is free. Part of your membership, you're already entitled to get this resource, so I would encourage you to do so. So as we wrap here, and I do want to leave some time for questions, and I'm willing to stay here as long as you guys want me to. Again, this is it in a nutshell. 5 options. Ignore the debt, borrow to get rid of the debt, and kind of refinance things, negotiate away your debt, walk away, or pay the debt off. So here's what I want you to do. This is my challenge to you as we close. I want you to think about these 5 options and write it down, just like this, and then assign a number to it. Just kind of look at them and say, no, I know this is not for me. Like, no way I'm going to just ignore my debt. So put a 1 next to that option 1, because you know you're not going to ignore your debt. But if you're looking at, say, negotiating, debt settlement, debt management, if you're thinking about, should I consider bankruptcy? Should I try to pay this for 3, 4, or 5? Put either a 4 if you think that might be a good option for me, or absolutely yes, I know this is the option for me. Assign a number to each one of these options. And when you do that, if you're going to choose that 1 or 4, you can see where my bias is here. I really don't want you to have to ignore your debt, that's for sure. And if you have to do bankruptcy, do it as a last resort. And if you choose one of those, just make sure that you try first to either borrow or negotiate or to successfully pay it. If that doesn't work for you and you need to file bankruptcy, then I think, again, I'm a person who says do not have any shame about doing so. But I want you to know that each one of you absolutely can get debt-free. Now you know your options. Now you know what the potential strategies are. And now you know the ramifications, the credit, the tax, the financial implications, and even the legal implications for doing any of these strategies. So before we turn it over for some Q&A, I want to give you again that email. I know some of you have asked questions in the chat, and Brittany has been so great to field those questions. But if you have other inquiries, you can certainly send them to financialwellness@nar.realtor. If you have any specific questions later that you'd like to ask me, you can certainly email me as well. I'll ask Brittany to drop my email in the chat for me as well, and it's just Lynnette with 2 N's, Lynnette@themoneycoach.net. But certainly for our discussion right now, if you have some questions, feel free to drop a comment in there, and you can, we'll get your questions answered right now. We showed this in the beginning in terms of my contact information, but anybody else who wants to contact me outside of email, if you just want to connect on social or professionally through LinkedIn, you can see my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all those good handles as well. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to join in this presentation and to listen. And I hope this has given you some great information, some insights, and maybe even some inspiration to know that if somebody like me, a girl who was raised in Los Angeles, who had a shoe shine man as a father, a mom who was later a single mom who raised 5 kids on her own, and who went to college, that's me, got into debt, got into a whole bunch of problems, but then turned my life around. If I could get out of $100,000 in credit card debt in just 3 years and never miss a single payment, again, I know you can do it too. So thank you guys again. I appreciate it.
Wow, that was fabulous. Thank you so much, Lynnette, for such a great presentation. We really appreciate your time and energy today.
You're so welcome.
This was great. So we do have some questions in our queue. For the members who are listening in, again, it's not too late to submit a question. Simply just ask it in the chat or email us at financialwellness@nar.realtor. And I know a couple of you are asking in the chat, will the recording be available? The answer is yes. We will post it at nar.realtor/CFFW/webinars. Again, that will be ready for your review on Friday, July 17th. And we will also include the PowerPoint presentations as well. So Lynnette, let's get started. Since we're a little short on time, let's get to some of the questions that came in. We have a really good one right here that was talking about the debt settlement options. And you mentioned, you know, for example, there are some tax ramifications that can happen as well as your credit score being affected. However, with the debt settlement approach, is your credit score still affected negatively if you are able to settle that debt on your own for the lowest amount without assistance from an agency? What are your thoughts on that?
So that's a great question, and the short answer is it depends on whether or not you refrain from paying. So if you don't pay for, say, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, then yes, your credit is still going to be damaged because in all likelihood, the creditor, and it's not even in all likelihood, it's a surety, it's a guarantee. They are going to report you to the credit bureau that they already had been just, reporting your account, just like they report, hundreds or potentially thousands of other accounts. So yes, even if you negotiate on your own and you refrain from paying, then yes, you will have credit damage. Some people might try to negotiate though and still just make the wee minimum amount of payments and kind of string things along a little bit as a strategy. And in that case, then no, as long as you meet any sort of required minimums, then you will not have credit damage. The challenge, of course, is that when you're doing debt settlement, the whole, you're already under stress, right, financially. And so the idea there is that debt settlement works in those instances because people don't pay the creditors. They sort of amass the money to pay a lump sum as opposed to making those minimum payments. So it's a tricky kind of balance to try to achieve there.
No, that does make sense, but that's a really good tip. So thank you, Lynnette. Another question came in saying, can you provide one strategy that helps keep you organized while paying off your debt?
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of strategies. So one is that I took every windfall that I got and I committed to using it to pay off my debt. So what do I mean by windfall? A windfall is any unexpected lump sum that comes outside of your normal paycheck. So again, unfortunately, we're living in the time of COVID-19. If you get stimulus money, a stimulus check, if you get a tax refund check, some people get life insurance proceeds if somebody passes away. Some people get a divorce settlement fund. Some people have money from an accident or things of that nature. Some people get bonuses from the job or a year-end bonus or something to that effect. So any kind of outside money that you weren't really anticipating, you can create a spreadsheet that has your debts that you owe, what the interest rates are that you're paying on them, and then the amount that you're able to commit to those every single month. But in addition to that, to accelerate the debt payoff, and again, to keep track of everything, you would just sort of have flagged items where you would know that, okay, I filed my taxes and I'm expecting, say, an income tax refund check from Uncle Sam, or this extra money that I'm getting from, a relative, from gift money, from holiday money, whatever, I'm going to use that as well to pay off my debt.
Really good point. Thank you for that tip. We really appreciate it. So kind of one more question. Can debt management services also work for paying off student loans? How would that look, Lynnette?
So another great question. Typically, most of them do not tackle student loans, unfortunately. Some of them do, and you'll have to really search. And I believe, Brittany, I've given you a resource for HUD certified credit counseling agencies. And I would just say kind of, call around a little bit and find out, or you can just first maybe do a Google search and find out about like debt management companies that help with student loans. The student loan dilemma is a really tricky one, and you'll find, unfortunately, again, that most do not handle that. Unfortunately, there are some specialty companies that help you to navigate repayment of student loans, but they're typically for-profit businesses. They typically charge a fee, and they're typically not nonprofit HUD-certified credit counseling or debt management companies.
Okay, so just to add on that too, so why are student loans treated differently than all other forms of debt?
Well, one of the reasons is bankruptcy reform that was passed several years ago. It changed the way that debts like credit cards too and student loans are handled in bankruptcy court. And in a nutshell, you have to prove it's not 100% technically impossible, but in actual practice and in reality, like 99, and I'm making up this number, but trust me, it's extremely high, like it's definitely above 98, 99% of people who try to get their student loan debt eliminated in bankruptcy courts fail at that. And it's essentially, a judge does have sort of discretion, let's say, to do it. But the law is written so tightly to say that you have to pass a ridiculous number of hurdles to show that you can't afford to pay this debt, you won't be able to afford to pay it in the future, and you likely won't be able to afford to pay it ever in life, practically. So there's very specific circumstances under which people can get their debt either eliminated in bankruptcy court, and that's a teeny infinitesimal, like really super small number of people who've managed to do it. Once in a while you might hear about it in the media, and it's extremely rare. Hundreds of thousands of people have tried it, and it almost always is not successful.
Okay, that's really good to know. Another question, and then we'll probably answer one or two more here, Lynnette. So let's say, for example, someone has a HELOC that they got for their home. They were doing some improvement projects. They paid majority of it down, but is there some kind of strategy that you recommend on paying it off now, or is there harm in leaving it dormant just in case any other projects may arise in the house? What are your thoughts on that?
So another great question. I love these queries that are coming in. I absolutely would not focus on paying off a HELOC right now, nor would I close it out right now, for two reasons. So first of all, interest rates are super low right now, and the person who posed the question said, what about if other projects need to be done in the future? That could be one possibility, but really that HELOC right now is kind of a standby line of credit. And in uncertain economic times like what we're in right now because of the COVID-19 crisis, cash is king, or the ability to draw upon and utilize credit as a form of cash is, right next to the king, is the queen, let's say. And so I think that in general, I would only work about, towards paying what's required, but I wouldn't commit an extra amount of cash to paying off a HELOC right now, especially because the rates are likely to be very low. And so I would put that extra, if you have it, some, flexibility in your budget towards other higher interest rate debt, like credit card debt, for example, student loans, auto loans, things of that nature, not focused on the HELOC. And also, in general, when it comes to paying off the HELOC, if you had the cash flow and if you were, in an okay or stable place to pay it off, I would definitely not close it. So, those HELOCs have a period where you can draw down first upon it. And again, it depends on the institution that issues the loan. But they'll have typically a drawdown period where you can use it for 3 years, 5 years, et cetera. And that's the point at which you can tap into the HELOC. Then you start your repayment period after that. So the HELOC itself can kind of ebb and flow. But again, given the magnitude and the uncertainty that we're in right now, I would reserve a HELOC right now, and I do have one as well. I would reserve a HELOC. I have one on a prior property that I had before we moved to Texas. I would just reserve it as a standby line, kind of as a just in case, just to be prepared for any unforeseen circumstances or emergencies.
Okay. Good to know. So this will be the second to last question because I know we're really running tight on time. So
I don't mind staying. Again, everybody wants to stay. I'll stay.
We'll just stay here.
No
what about IRS back taxes? Are those negotiable?
Yes. Oh, for sure. So
wow.
A couple things here. And again, if any of your folks want to message me, you can email me at Lynnette@themoneycoach.net. I have a ton of content around this. But in a nutshell, right now during COVID-19, the IRS has been a lot more flexible with people who owe debts, who owe IRS tax debt. But even before COVID hit, they had everything from offering compromises where you could work out reductions in your taxes or payment plans, installment loans, depends on the amount that you owe. They've increased the cap over the years, $25,000 up to $50,000 in tax debt that you can get on a payment plan with, et cetera. And so again, for today's recording, as we're speaking today, July 15th being the extended tax filing deadline. If you haven't done that, certainly file an extension. It gives you an extension of time to file, but not an extension of the obligation you have to pay any taxes due. But the IRS has a number of programs, and I've actually helped guide some people to just, hear, because a lot of people are kind of scared to deal with the IRS.
Right.
It's one of those things where, again, you have to kind of hit it and tackle it head on and not take the ostrich approach and put your head in the sand. You can definitely work out a payment plan with the IRS.
Okay, good to know. And here's our last question, Lynnette, and then for anybody, if we didn't get to your question, I do apologize. I will make sure that they're forwarded to Lynnette so that way she can email them back with great responses, and I know that there's a lot of resources that she also has to offer. Her contact information is here displayed on the screen, and I will make sure to include her email as well again in the chat as we're getting ready to close. But Lynnette, what are your thoughts on for somebody who may live, check by check and doesn't have extra money left over to pay off the extra credit card debt? What kind of strategy could you provide? And then maybe moving forward, could that resource or tool be also used for clients, to assist them if they're having issues with purchasing a home,
For sure. So a couple things. We know, again, even before COVID hit, that a lot of folks were struggling living paycheck to paycheck. By some measures, they said about 70% of all Americans didn't even have $400 in savings. So again, a lot of folks living on the edge financially, even prior to the coronavirus pandemic. I'm telling people to do a lot of different things, and Brittany, we're going to talk about this too, maybe for dealing with irregular income, but still having regular bills. A couple things you can do. One is shift your payment due date. So, a lot of us tend to have bills that come due right around the same time of the month. Maybe it's the 1st of the month, the 10th of the month, et cetera. Well, if you find all your bills are getting due at one time, you can pick up the phone and ask your creditors, listen, I need to extend my payment due date. Can we switch it to, 2 weeks from now, 10 days from now, 3 weeks from now, et cetera. So not everything comes due at once. Then in regards to the credit cards specifically that the person asked about, not being able to pay those credit cards in full, don't feel bad about that right now. I've been telling people that some of the traditional rules of personal finance have kind of gone out the window. And two in particular are pay off all your credit card balances in full and save X amount, say 10% every single out of every single paycheck or every single month. Well, right now, in the middle of a pandemic, it's not realistic. Not everybody can pay off their credit card balances in full every month or pay 2 or 3 times the minimum payment. And again, under normal circumstances, that's definitely what I recommend. But these are hardly normal times. So don't feel guilty. If you can only make minimum payments right now, do that. It'll preserve your credit rating and it'll preserve some cash for you. And as I mentioned, cash is king because we just don't know how long this COVID-19 emergency will last. Secondly, on the savings front, don't feel bad if you're not like saving 10%, 5%, 8%, or whatever the target is or the percentage you have been saving. Just do like this instead. Save more in those months when you generate more income and then save less when your income is lower. So in other words, let your savings rate right now ebb and flow with your income. You're going to match your savings with your income. That's a much more sustainable way to keep saving, and to not like totally stop saving at all, but not to worry about meeting the pressure or the target of it has to be a certain percentage or it has to be a certain dollar amount every single month. Give yourself a little bit of reprieve financially because, again, these are unprecedented times.
Very good point. Awesome. That is such an awesome closer, Lynnette. Is there any last thing that you just want to say before we head out to close?
I guess the very last thing I would say is not only should you give yourself a financial reprieve, but I think a lot of us need to practice what I call financial forgiveness. Because at the end of the day, you need to understand that if you're kind of beating yourself up about your state of affairs, where you are, problems, mistakes perhaps even that you've made, it's not going to help you to get ahead financially. And trust me, I've made every mistake in the book, from having credit card debt. When I was in college, I had my car repossessed. I did so many things that were, crazy. and like I said, I lived to tell the tale to get to the other side. So I don't want people to feel so bad if they're carrying debt, if they're not saving at the same level, if they're needing some support, whether that's public assistance, food banks. We have all this emotional kind of baggage laden in our own identities, our professional identities, our sense of self-worth. And I want people to understand that your self-worth is not equal to your net worth. You're valuable as a person. You have value outside of the bank account and the number of zeros, in that bank account. And so practice a little financial forgiveness. If you feel like you've made mistakes, just learn from those, try to do better, and move on. Because that's really the more healthy approach to take towards anything, but certainly towards creating a more secure financial future for yourself.
Perfect. Awesome job, Lynnette. This was such a great presentation. We really appreciate everything that you just shared with us today. Thank you so much for all that you've just poured out in terms of your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So one additional resource that I would also like to provide is NAR's Right Tools Right Now resource. This relaunch program includes reduced or no-cost tools to support you through this COVID-19 pandemic. So the site includes webinars, educational resources, and timely market reports for your business. So please feel free to check out the site. Just visit nar.realtor/RTRN, which stands for Right Tools Right Now. So again, thank you so much for your time. This concludes our webinar, everyone. Special thanks for joining the call. And if you've missed any part of this session, we will be posting the recorded webinar as well as the PowerPoint under nar.realtor/CFFW/webinars. I repeat, the recording will be available for your review on Friday, July 17th at nar.realtor/CFFW/webinars. And at the end of this session, please note a survey bar is going to pop up on your desktop browser. Please leave us your feedback on today's presentation. Thank you, and we look forward to having you join us for our next Financial Source webinar on August 5th at 1 p.m. Central. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much, Lynnette. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.